Hello my friends, and welcome to this week's Country Christmas video. I'm going to be making 4 different types of ornaments today that I hope you will enjoy. It is Create Day. Let's get started. My first project is a trio of snowmen. I just took some small scrap wood, cut it down into 3 pieces. It's different pieces of wood, and the larger piece is going to be the body of the snowman, and then the other 2 pieces will make his hat. I'm going to paint the body of the snowman with DIY's White Swan, and even though this first piece was already previously painted white, I didn't remember what color it was or what type of paint I had used. So I gave that one a fresh coat as well, just to make sure that they were all the same color. Next, I'm going to paint the hat pieces in DIY's Black Velvet. Now, I am leaving a product list in my description box for you to check out so that you can see everything that I used in today's video, along with some affiliate links. When that paint was dry, I just used my finger sander to go around the entire piece, mostly concentrating on the edges to bring back some of that natural wood color underneath to give these a nice distressed look. I'm going to now glue those 2 pieces together with some Titebond Quick and Thick, spreading that out onto the bottom of the top portion of the hat and centering it down onto that little flat piece that is the brim. Once I get all 3 pieces glued together, I do take a small clamp and clamp these together and let them dry for several hours before I go on to the next step. So now I'm going to take my antiquing wax and apply this to each hat, brushing it on and wiping it back. This gives it a very rich yet vintage look to it, and it also seals in that DIY paint. I'm applying Ultra Matte Duraclear varnish to the bodies of the snowman, and then I'm going to be applying that antiquing wax over that once it's dry. And with this, I'm wiping it back with a baby wipe so that I get a lot less coverage of it on there than I did onto the black hats. I want these to look a little rustic, but not super dark, so that's why I'm wiping most of that back. You can also use clear wax instead of the Duraclear varnish to achieve that same look. Now I'm going to glue the hat onto the body of the snowman with the Titebond Quick and Thick. Then I will clamp these together as well and let them dry. In this case, I think it was overnight. And these are the clamps that you can pick up at Harbor Freight for like, $3 or $4. They're really affordable. Now I have a pretty good collection of googly eyes, so I thought I would try these as my snowman eyes instead of just hand painting them. I do hand paint one of the snowmen, but I wanted to see if I liked how these turned out. I don't want to use them as is though. I want them painted black. So I taped them down onto a piece of painter's tape that I've tucked the ends under to stick to that paper towel. And then I'm just using DIY's Black Velvet for that. I did have to do a couple of coats, so I used my little heat tool to speed up that drying time. Now this is a piece of wood shim. You can buy these in a pretty good sized package, and you know how it has that one end that's really thin. I like to use those to cut out little triangles for the snowman nose. They're easy to cut with just regular scissors, and they're just the right kind of thickness for a small piece like this. I'm going to paint these with terracotta and then use my Timber Brown Stays On ink to go around the edges and add some distressing. Now I'm going to seal that DIY paint on the eyes with my Duraclear matte sealer. It gives just enough shine on there that it's not truly matte, but it's not like super glossy. And now I'm gluing those down with the Titebond Quick and Thick. Next, I'm going to add some little black buttons to the front. This is just a package of black and white buttons I picked up from Hobby Lobby. And I'm just going to go ahead and glue some of those onto the front with the Titebond Quick and Thick. Now for this one snowman that he's like taller and skinnier and has the taller hat, I wanted his eyes to be more of an oval shape, so I decided to hand paint those on there. I'm just using black acrylic paint and a small artist brush to paint those in the best I can. Then I will go ahead and glue on his nose. And now I'm going to add the mouth on all three of these with the black acrylic paint, and I'm just using the end of a paintbrush to make little dots, doing slightly different shape, the curved shape of the mouth on each snowman. And then on this one I hadn't added the buttons yet, so I went ahead and did that. And now I will go in with my white acrylic paint and add some highlights to the eyes. First I'm adding a little dot with the end of a paintbrush, and then I will use the other end of a small artist brush to make like a little curved line as another highlight. I'm not getting super fancy here, just keeping it really simple. Next, I'm drilling a small hole in the top of the hat so that I can add one of these eye screws. These are 5/8 of an inch, and I picked them up at Ace Hardware. You can also get them on Amazon. I will leave a link below in the description box. Now I'm taking some of that homespun fabric, just cutting a nice thin piece to tie around the top of the hat, knotting it off to one side, and then trimming up the ends of it. Then I will add some little greenery pieces that I cut off of my smaller picks that I have. I'm adding some little red pip berries, and then I will add a rusty star onto the corner of his hat. For his scarf, I'm taking another thin piece of that homespun fabric and tying that off, using some hot glue to secure it in one little spot on the back, and then on the front just enough to keep those ends laying flat. I'm adding a piece of jute twine through the end of that eye screw, and then I will tie that off at the top as far up as I feel like it needs to be to make the right size for a hanger. Cut off the excess, and that completes this project. Pretty simple and pretty cute. Let me know what you think. For my next ornament, I'm using this wood slice from Amazon. It's one of the larger ones. And I'm going to be taking this burnt umber acrylic paint, watering it down a little bit, and brushing this all over the front and the back. Once I get that on there, I go ahead and wipe it back with a baby wipe. This will lighten it up and make it look more of a stained look than a painted look. I made this casting from my amazing resin using the IOD Jingle mold. I'm giving this a base coat of that same burnt umber paint. And while that's drying, I'm going to get out my IOD Winter Forest stamp and make some little impressions onto this wood slice with my Stays On ink and Timber Brown. I picked one of the smaller trees. I'm going to ink that up and try it out onto a piece of paper towel first. And I can see that I need more ink in that one area, so I just need to be aware of that. So now I'm going to go ahead and stamp this on right in the center. And then I will re-ink that stamp and repeat this on either side, moving that tree down just a little bit. And as you can see, I'm not getting like a full good impression on here because of those little ridges on that wood slice. But I'm okay with that because this is supposed to just be kind of, a suggestion of trees in the background, and I want it to look rustic. So I just had to add a little bit more here and there so that you could at least tell it was supposed to be a tree. Now back to my casting. I'm using this color. It's an off-white. I think it's called Light Mocha. I'm going to brush this on and then use my baby wipe to wipe it back, just so that I can still get some of that brown showing through. I don't want complete coverage. I want a variation of colors onto my casting. Next, I'm going to do the same process with DIY's Crinoline. I wanted a little bit warmer color on here, so I picked this one, and it did give me the look I wanted. So just brushing on, wiping back the excess. Now, once that ink was dry on the wood slice, I took my Duraclear Ultramatte Sealer to seal in the entire piece, including those edges, and I'm going to use this to seal in my casting as well. Now I'm going to use this brushed bronze metallic paint to add highlights to my casting. I'm just going to go over this with a kind of a dry brush. I'm offloading that paint so that I don't get too much on there. And when he's done, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing around the very outer edge of that wood slice. I'm just running my brush along that top edge, not going around the sides, just on the top, dragging it out. When that's dry, I'm going to attach my little buck to the wood slice with my Type Bond Quick and Thick. Oh, and by the way, if you missed my first two Christmas videos, I will leave those linked at the end of this one in case you are interested. Now we can start embellishing. I'm using hot glue to attach some little pieces of greenery, and then I'm going to add in some little gold pip berries to add a little bit of color to this, and that kind of ties in that bronze color. And now I'm going to make the dreaded bow. I have this, I think it's about 2 or 3 inch wide ribbon that I got from Joann's, I believe. I'm going to cut this in. I removed the wire first. It's wire edge, and I just pulled that wire out. I'm going to cut this into thirds and then hot glue this to itself on the inside so that I have a nice finished edge. And originally I was going to make like a regular bow with tails, so that's why these pieces are so long. I ended up doing just like a bow tie, so I didn't need this, long piece of ribbon. I'm going to cut one of those strips that hasn't been hemmed and just make a loop. Then I'm going to scrunch that together in the center and use a piece of floral wire to tie around that and twist it really well so that I get a nice little kind of bow-shaped, bow tie shape bow, if that makes sense. I found that using some needle nose pliers, especially if you have arthritis, was super helpful to twist that around. Trim off that excess wire, and then I'm going to take a piece of that hemmed ribbon that I did with the hot glue, snip off just long enough to put this around the center of that little bow to cover up the wire. Then I can hot glue that in place on the back. I'm attaching that to the front, just at the bottom of the buck in the center with some hot glue, making him look super extra dapper. Now I'm going to drill a hole a little bit bigger than the original hole that was in this wood slice so that I can take another strip of that fabric or that ribbon and use that as the hanger. So I'm taking that piece that was left over from the piece I cut for the center of the bow, and I'm putting that through there, tying a knot at the top, and this project is complete. For my next ornament, I'm taking this clear plastic ornament from Dollar Tree. I'm going to unscrew that top and give this a couple of coats of DIY's White Swan. I'm using a little sponge dauber for this. I preferred to have the texture that this leaves behind as opposed to having any brush strokes. I didn't want to use the hanger that came with this, so I snipped that off and it's just attached with hot glue. So I'm going to dig that out the best I can to remove the rest of that string. And then I'm using my heat tool to kind of heat up that glue that's in there and poke through with a toothpick until I get a big enough opening that I can insert my own hanger. So now I want to cover the outside of the cap with some jute twine. I'm using my hot glue to get this attached on there. I'm going to wrap this around, but I am having to glue it quite frequently because of all those ridges on the cap. It just doesn't, you can't just wrap around and around without adding the glue because of all the ridges on it. So I will just take the time necessary to continue wrapping this around and gluing it in place all the way around, up around the actual top of that to where it covers that top piece. And now I'm sealing the DIY paint with my Duraclear matte varnish. When that's dry, I'm going to apply some transfers. I'm going to use these little cardinals. This comes from the Cozy Christmas set. I believe I got this off of Amazon. I will leave a link if possible below. I'm going to trim around this, cutting in like little notches in as best I can because that surface is so rounded and curved. That will help this fit on there better, making it easier to transfer. I just use the little transfer tool that you do for any of your rub-on transfers and then burnish that in once it's all on there. I add a cardinal transfer on each side, and then in between I fill in with just some little greenery pieces. These are the ones I want to use to fill in the gaps in between those two cardinals. So I'm just going to trim those out the best I can to fit them in. This is where you can just add little bits and pieces here and there. You can kind of overlay them, bring them together to where it looks like it all belongs together, even though they were cut out separately. With all those on there, this gets another coat of that matte varnish. I cut a length of jute twine and folded it over and fed that through the top of that cap. And on the bottom section there, I'm just tying a knot so that it will catch up onto the inside of that cap and stay secure. Then I'm taking this wood bead that I have. I got a bunch of these off of Amazon. I'm just going to run that string on top right through that bead and then tie that off so that it stays in place. I'm just making a knot and pulling it down as close to the top of that bead as I can. Then I make a knot a couple inches up above that to make the hanger. and then I can just trim off the excess. Then I reattach that cap onto the ornament, and that completes this one. I left that bead natural, but you could paint it or stain it, whatever you choose to do. For my last project, I'm using this piece of poplar. It's 1/4 inch by 3.5 inches wide. The original board was 2 feet long, and I cut it down to size. I also have these little trim pieces that are some unused molding pieces. I originally thought I wanted this to be DIY's Old and Gray. I was not happy how that looked on this particular piece of wood, so I went in with raw umber, watering it down to make like a stain, and brushing this on. I was much happier with the look of this with this color on there instead. I'm going to apply this all around that board and on those little end pieces. When everything was dry, I'm using my Type Bond 2 premium wood glue to attach those little, I guess they would be like little accent boards across the top and the bottom, just leaving a little space up from the bottom and down from the top. I want to wipe off any excess glue that squeezed out, and then I'm going to cover this with my Duraclear Ultra Matte Sealer. Next, I'm going to drill a couple of holes in the top, right through both of those pieces, the board and the trim piece. That's where I'm going to attach my wire hanger to. I'm using 20 gauge copper wire that I picked up, I believe, from Micheals in the jewelry section. I'm going to feed each end from the back through to the front, and then using my needle nose pliers, I'm just going to twist that around into a circle until I can get it to where it's stable and won't pull through that hole. And this also gives it a decorative look as well. You just want to make sure that when you're done twisting it, that you get that little pokey end either bent down or trimmed off and bent down so that it's not sticking up and can poke somebody. To make my candy canes, I'm starting with this Warm and Natural. It comes in a craft size that I found on Amazon, as well as the plastic candy canes and this homespun fabric. I'm going to cut a strip. I didn't measure it, it's probably about 1/2 inch. And I'm going to hot glue this on down at the bottom. I'm going to run this up at an angle. So I want to get that bottom on there with my hot glue, and then just start wrapping this around that entire candy cane. Now, this is something that you can use this and then a piece of fabric and make it striped so that that Warm and Natural shows through as like the white stripes. But on these, I wanted to completely cover them with the homespun fabric. So I'm just using the Warm and Natural as kind of a cushion and filler to like build up the candy cane. So now I cut a strip of that homespun fabric, and again starting at the bottom and then working at an angle, I'm going to wrap this around the entire candy cane. I will just add little bits of hot glue here and there whenever I feel like it's necessary to hold this in place. Once I get to the other end of the candy cane, I'm going to snip off that excess and glue down that final piece underneath on the bottom there. I repeat those steps on another candy cane with just using a different homespun fabric. Now I have my 2 candy canes onto a piece of greenery, laid them out, and now I'm going to glue them into place with my hot glue. Now I'm taking a piece of jute twine. I'm going to wrap that around the middle section there, make a knot, and then add a little rusty bell to that. I'm just going to feed that through. Took some tweezers to grab onto it to pull it through. It was a really tight fit. And I'm just going to add that on there, tighten a knot, and then make a little bow. I'm using my Surebonder hot glue to attach this entire piece now to the center section of that board. I'm using IOD's Apothecary label stamps to make a little, kind of like a little rustic piece of paper to go on here with the word joy on it. I'm stamping this or inking this up with my StazOn ink in Timber Brown, stamping that on there, and then I used the smaller font to see which one I liked best and which one fit best on my project. I chose the smaller one. I started to rip that out. This is just on packaging paper that you get like in your Amazon packages. But it was just like too big. So I trimmed it down, and then I took my paintbrush with some water on it to soften that up a little bit so that I could still give it that organic torn edge. Now I'm going to crumple this up and get it nice and rustic looking, and I'm using Distress Oxide in Vintage Photo. Just going to rub this all around that paper on the top and the sides and the back. Get it nice and distressed. While I have this ink out, I'm going to go ahead and add that to that jute twine. And then I will glue that little piece of paper in there. And once that's set up, I can add a few extra embellishments to finish this off. I've got another piece of greenery I want to add right in there in the middle upper section where that candy cane was lifted up. This kind of helps fill that in. Then I'm going to add a pine cone and some little red pip berries and of course a rusty star. Before we take a final look at everything, I want to thank you so much for watching today. I hope you find my content useful. Well, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. But more importantly, I hope I've inspired you to go create something. See you next time.